thank you for joining us today. Before we get going, I would like to acknowledge country and acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connections to lands, waters, skies and communities. We pay our deepest respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. I am joining from the beautiful sunny Wurundjeri lands here in the east of Melbourne, and we would invite you to share where you are joining us from in the chat, please. Right, welcome to our first Placed in Practice session. In terms of the way we would like to operate, it really is just about people being sharing what's going on, their experience, and for all of us to learn from each other is the idea behind Place in Practice. In terms of today, we will do some introductions. Because it's our first event of the year, we thought we would do a bit of an update from Place generally, and then we will dive into the 12 Elements framework with a bit of what is it, why did we put it together the way it is, how can you use it, and where else can you explore more. We will also have a bit of a Q&A at the end, and throughout we've built in some pauses where we will do some Slido questions and gather your feedback in real time and share that back. So hopefully that gives us some interaction and to be able to hear from you throughout the session, and you don't have to listen to me the whole time. Joining me from Place are our wonderful team, and Kaya from my team will also be doing some of the facilitation, so we will throw to her at various points. All right. Shall we move to the how to engage in the discussion so that people can... So the way we've set this up so that you can input to the discussion, we have the chat available, but also we have Slido set up. So if you have with you your phone, if you can scan the QR code, and there are some questions in there, but the first one we would love you to be thinking about and pop in a response is about the biggest challenges facing your community at the moment. And while you're doing that, I will give you a bit of the Place update. And I think we're going to put the link to the Slido in the chat as well, in case you don't have your phone or the QR code thing is complicated. It often is for me. All right. In terms of a Place update, for those of you who caught the newsletter that came out late yesterday, that certainly gave you some of the kind of commentary from Luke about what's going on, but in terms of a bit of a summary of where we're focused and what that might look like for people waiting to see what's coming through. We are really focused on developing and curating and collating practical tools, resources and opportunities to support the work of place-based change. So building more tools and resources, but also creating those opportunities like this for people to come together and learn from each other, and also to develop things together. Also focused on shifting the systemic barriers and testing new ways of working. So building out from the shared decision-making framework that was released late last year, building some tools and resources to support that. A number of really exciting bits in terms of workforce opportunities. So a kind of menu of the current training that's available across a spectrum linked to the skills, and also the workforce strategy is being developed currently, and so there'll be a draft of that released. The other thing that will be coming out is the opportunities for scholarships and support to engage in training, and that'll be a open EOI process. So some great bits happening there. And from within our team, we're starting to work with place-based initiatives to build what we're calling the practice evidence about the what and how of place-based change. And so this all links directly into the 12 elements. and we'll be both sharing what it is that we're learning, but also using that to sort of develop tools and resources that are useful. And the other piece that we're really focused on is developing shared ways of measuring and demonstrating impact. So the sort of understanding of what is it, how does it happen, and how can we measure it, and how can we demonstrate it to sort of support the advocacy around greater support for place-based work will be happening too. So watch out for all our comms channels, and we will link back to them all at the end of the session, but there are opportunities to engage across a whole range of things in the next sort of 6 months or so. Okay. How's everyone going with the Slido and the inputting what's going on? Is that all happening okay? Excellent. All right. Let's talk about 12 elements. So what we're going to try and cover off today, and I do realise that it's quite an ambitious agenda, so let's see how we go. But what we're wanting to do is to give you all a sense of the framework, where to find it, which shouldn't be too hard for us to help you do, but to give you a sense of the 12 elements framework, what it is, why we developed it, how you can use it, and what sorts of tools and resources we have pulled together and sort of created already, and what could be coming. So we will do that over the next little bit, and hopefully you can also ask questions about it. You can provide your views about whether it makes sense, whether our kind of categorisation of things has helped and what's missing. Okay. In terms of where to find it, this is the easy bit. So on the Place website, we have a resource library. And if you click into the resource library, the 12 elements is almost right down the bottom because they went on in chronological order. So if you go down, there is the summary of the 12 elements. Within it are in practice examples, and there are also the list of resources there and links to the resources to support it. Okay. Before we do this, Kaya, have you got a summary of what we've seen in the Slido?
It's, as somebody pointed out in the chat, and thanks for that, Jess, that it's coming through actually on the Q&A at the moment. So I'm just going to go through. We are seeing lots of responses come in. So maybe
We'll keep doing this.
Yeah, can I get you to circle back even? I'll put these. Thanks.
Sure. The best laid plans with tech, always. Okay. So in terms of the framework, it has been built to help us describe what place-based change is and what it isn't. So it's a framework. It is our first iteration of it. We've developed it from all that we heard visiting the 50 plus communities on the listening tour, and also doing a rapid evidence review of about 130 sort of different sources, documented sources of evidence around place-based work. And so the invitation really to all of you is to give us some feedback about, are there really key things missing in it? Does it make sense? Does it resonate? But this is our first iteration. So it's a way of describing what the key elements of place-based change work are, a guide for sort of quality practice. It's designed to be flexible, adaptable, broad enough that it can apply for most place-based initiatives. What it's not is the formula. It's not a sort of ingredients list and you'll get the perfect outcome. It is a collection of elements which together, what we've heard and what we understand, are the core parts of what go together to make really strong, powerful community-led place-based change. And as I said, it's not a step-by-step process. We all know that change is not a linear process. You don't start here and get to there and it's finished. And the other piece, and we're wanting to develop more of our understanding about this, but the other piece is that all of these elements will look different. Will look different in different communities, but will also look different at different times in the sort of lifespan and maturity of an initiative. In terms of the structure of it, it's based around the three principles of subsidiarity, accountability, and partnership. There are 12 elements, 4 under each of those, and we have classified each of the elements as a structure, a process, or a practice. And whilst quite clearly some of them could be categorised as each, we have done it as a way of helping identify what it is, what are the kind of key actions to make these things, bring these things to life in a community. So that's what it is. Can we have the next slide, please? Our working definition of the structures, processes, and practices go a little bit like this. None of them are perfect definitions. But the structures are the formal arrangements that enable the collective work. So the underpinning pieces that are there that are not dependent on who is leading something at a particular time, but are the pieces like a community governance structure, where, or a board, or a those sorts of structures that exist no matter who the person is at the time. Processes are the agreed and articulated ways that things happen, and then the practices are the everyday ways of working together. And they're all mutually reinforcing, and so great structures without process and practice won't get you very far. Great processes but no structure to anchor them in won't get you as far, and great practices but neither processes or structures also won't get as far. So it is the combination that create the robust foundations for place-based change. And so the structures are the things like formal arrangements, governance groups, and the things that define who's involved, and who's sort of at the table, where authority sits, whereas the processes might be more around how feedback loops come in, how a group works together to make decisions, how things happen. And then the practices really are about how both individuals and organisations show up in a partnership or in the sort of collaboration piece. The practices, often we talk about place-based work being different because it's a different way of working, and there's lots of focus around what the practices are that are different, and they are really important in terms of the focus on things like trust and reciprocity and the various sort of elements that are in there that have been identified that we'll unpack in a minute, but the various practices that enshrine the sort of approach are the bits that you see on a day-to-day basis, and often the practices are the piece that you will see happening first. And so there will be people from different organisations who work together in particular ways. There'll be ways of working with community that reflect these kind of practices. I might stop there. Have we got some Slido feedback,
We
Kaya?
do, Eve, and we thank you everyone for taking the time, and some really interesting comments coming through. And I think things we've also heard on the listening tour, right? So when people are talking about funding, not only the sustainability part of funding, some of the short-term cycles, but we're also looking at, as new programs come in, how do they link in to community programs, or how do you fund the relational work, as we're just talking about in the wheel? How do you fund that trust building work, that engagement piece, the coming together? People also reflected that as communities, we know well-being, housing, health, all coming up as key issues, and a lot of these factors are interconnected that people are facing. So how do you tackle the complexity? And that community is not always homogenous, right? Which is something we've heard in many places. So one size doesn't fit all. How do you take a big LGA and make sure that there are different community needs, and how do you address that? How do you look at regional areas that are often neglected as well? So I think it's how do you listen to community and understand the full scope of who is community as well are coming through in some of the questions. And then I think there's interesting things coming through on being dependent on certain champions. How do you embed, that the work that needs to be done for place-based across the community? So really linking to, I think, some of the things we've heard in the various elements of the 12 elements. And I think, is it the next slide that has another question that we're going to go to? Or am I?
We've got ourselves a little bit out of order,
Oh, yeah,
but
sorry.
how about we
Okay.
do that and then
Yes.
let's do that and then I will keep going.
Great. Thanks. So you should see another question now coming up in your Slido that's asking you to maybe look at the 12 elements and thinking about your current experience at the moment. Which one of these might be most important to you now? And you can select more than one there.
Okay. While you're all doing that, I will just talk a little bit about the why and what we're hoping having a framework will sort of help. So one is about building shared language and understanding about what we mean when we're talking about place-based change. So one of our reflections is that we all use lots of words that have a kind of generic meaning, but in this, and we all assume shared understanding, but often there can be quite different understanding of what it means in a particular context or what it really looks like. So part of what we are aiming to do is to be clearer about what do we mean when we are using particular phrases or particular language, and what does it mean when we're talking about place-based change? What is it? What isn't it? The other bit is about breaking down that kind of concept of community-led place-based change and the sorts of phrases that, sort of the working in partnership or doing things in collaboration or having or community-led or community at the table, some of those phrases, to break it down into the parts, but also to be quite specific about what do we mean by that and what are the key elements for that to happen. And so by doing that, we are aiming to help us to sort of move from the concept of it into action. It can also be a guide for where to focus effort, energy, and investment. So this is based on the experience of 50 plus communities, plus the reflections from the documented evidence about place-based work, and there are some very clear themes that come through. And so if you were starting out, or if you were sort of starting to think about how do we build in this approach, these 12 elements are what the evidence tell us are where you will get the most impact for your energy and investment and effort. We really are hoping that it is flexible enough for all different types of place-based initiatives. So it's not built only for, ones that there are a range of different types of place-based initiatives. And so what we're hoping is that this is broad enough that whether you are a small sort of 2 or 3 person just starting out focused on a very specific issue, or whether you've been running for a long time and have a really broad remit, that you can see your work in this framework. And from our perspective, it gives us a foundation to build a suite of tools and resources on. And from a place perspective, we are using it as a sort of anchor framework. So you will see increasingly that as our resources come out, that they will use the 12 elements as a reference point. So whether it is in terms of skills and training and the types of sort of pathways for place-based approaches, whether it is around data as an enabler for place-based change, similarly with the sort of shared decision-making pieces, it will all link back into the 12 elements framework, because this has been our sort of foundational piece in terms of understanding what it is and isn't. Okay. It's quite confusing because I can't see anyone, so I get no sense of whether people are going, nah, I'm lost. Anyway, I'll just keep going and someone can tell me if I'm blabbling on and I've lost everybody. Okay, are we ready for
you've
this?
got a very, great. People are using reactions. Thank you, everyone. Sam, are you able to see the results that we've got? We can switch that screen up. Otherwise we can, oh, no, something's coming. Okay, we zoom in. Really interesting. So people, if we look at the top priorities that, or the most important, you can see there, responsive to local context and valuing local knowledge is getting up there. Developing that shared vision and purpose. And like we discussed, I think always what we hear is the importance of making sure what's being built is built on that and valuing that local knowledge equal to expertise in other areas as well. We've got cross-sector collaborate, some of the other.
That's great.
Yeah.
Sorry, I will say that we are very happily nerdy and love looking at all this stuff. And we do have the data portfolio in with us. And so I'm looking at it going, oh, does this tell us what can we do with this? Anyway, let's move on. But that is really interesting feedback. Yes.
A bit, yeah. Interesting to know if those most important ones are the ones that are hardest or easiest, and we'll come back to that in some of the QA with how that's ranked. Thank you.
Yeah. Let's dive into the detail. So we start with subsidiarity, and I know that there has been quite a little bit of there's been quite a bit of sort of back and forth about the phrase, like the word subsidiarity, and we have a bit of a joke in our team because a couple of us can't say it properly, and it's not a common word. It's not, it's not part of our everyday parlance. I have to say that whilst I find the word a little bit hard to say, I love how specific it is in terms of what it actually means. And so it is exactly what we mean when we say it is about decisions being made as close to the people that are impacted by them, and where people have the greatest knowledge of the context and the strongest stake in the outcomes. It is exactly what we all hope for to sort of build towards. I do also wonder whether part of our sort of lack of familiarity is it is not a really common thing for us. We don't participate in citizen juries. We don't participate in local decision making in this way. And so my, I think, slightly idealistic hope is that as we progress with this work, that it actually becomes more familiar to us all, particularly in terms of what it means. And so in terms of the sort of the framework and the way we're defining it, it is about shifting authority closer to community, enshrining local leaders, organisations and residents in the decision making and in the shaping of services and systems that are there to serve them. So it's a pretty powerful concept, and certainly there are examples from across the world where it happens more, and it's part of what the work that's happening around the shifting of the systems and around commissioning and exploring different ways of working is about how do we bring decision making closer to communities. Okay. Accountability is about the accountability of systems. And often this is about service systems, but that systems should be responsive and answerable to communities. And so this is partly where the sort of the structures and the mechanisms are really important in terms of how do you create enabling structures and processes for the feedback loops to happen and for communities and the people who are affected by service systems are able to provide the feedback and also able to hold them accountable. And so it's more than consultation, it's governance structures, and the sort of practices that seek the views of community, not only as tell us what you think, but we're not going to change anything, but also as a way in the design and in the improvement of systems. There is also the piece around transparency of resource flows. So it is one of the sort of power differentials that's highlighted quite often is that the information and the knowledge about resource flows and what's being spent and what's being invested is not visible to community members. People don't know what's meant to be coming in and what's meant to be working for their community. And so making those resource flows more transparent is also a sort of important shift in a way of working. And then the shared responsibility, or what we've called mutual accountability, is not about saying it's all sits with one actor, but that there should be shared responsibility for whether the systems are delivering what a community needs or not. And partnership, I think we would probably all agree is one of the key, obviously, sorry, that's a really silly thing to say. It is one of the key principles, but it's probably one of the most recognisable principles of community-led place-based change. That the complex challenges that communities are looking to shift and to solve aren't going to happen by one actor doing things. And so it is this concept of how do we bring together all the actors who can influence an issue. So it's governments, it's service providers, it's funders, it's communities to work collaboratively across the silos, across sectors and across timeframes, and that these partnerships are grounded in trust, reciprocity, shared vision and purpose, and that the structures and the practices and the processes all support and enable the effectiveness of a partnership and of collaboration working towards the shared vision and purpose. So to unpack the elements themselves, and I would encourage you, if you haven't already, to go to the website. What we have done is done a summary for each of the elements individually that includes a summary of the evidence, identifies whether it's a structure, process or practice, and looks at why is it important in place-based work and why does it matter, but also provides an in-practice example of what does this look like on the ground, what's a good sort of practice example of how this can play out and how it does play out in a specific community. So I would encourage you to do that, and also a bit of a plug for one of the key things our team is looking to do this coming year is to build that build our sort of bank of in-practice examples. So in terms of the individual elements in here, there's investing in local leadership, which is investing in the capacity and legitimacy of local organisations and leaders to act as stewards of change. And all of us who've worked in the space and do work in the space know that it is community leaders and that are key. It sort of doesn't happen without local leadership and local organisations. And so this is the sort of, I guess, calling out that there needs to be investment in it and recognition of how important it is. The next one is valuing local knowledge, which lived experience and place-based insights need to be recognised as critical forms of expertise in decision-making. We talk quite a lot in the data space about how valuable community insights are. You can have the sort of administrative data, you can have all of that, but without the community experience and the community insights, you don't actually get the whole story. Responsive to local context sounds pretty obvious, but is one of the magic things about place-based responses is that they are developed in response to local context. So they take into account the history, they take into account the sort of the culture of a community, the needs, and it's the sort of opposite of the one size fits all. Here we are, we've got a program that addresses X, Y, Z. It is that how do we do this in a way that's going to work for us, and links very clearly to the valuing of local knowledge and investing in local leadership, because you need to be able to hear about that. It needs to be part of design and decision making. And then community governed structures are the sort of the underpinning structural piece that is really important as the mechanism by which community voices can be heard. So formal mechanisms that exist for community members to guide, oversee and make decisions, particularly in the context of the sort of accountability of systems about priorities, funding and performance. In terms of accountability, there are, again, 4 elements. And so going back to front, as I seem to be doing, one of those is about continuous feedback loops. So the ongoing mechanisms that allow communities to track progress, raise concerns and trigger change when systems are underperforming. And often from a systems change lens, often one will find that there are feedback loops missing. And this is one of the reasons that systems aren't responsive, because there's a feedback loop that actually doesn't exist. And so really important to use the sort of process mechanism to build in continuous feedback loops. Mutual accountability, as I talked about a little bit before, is about the responsibility being shared for results and outcomes, and not pushed all onto one actor. And so, again, there are sort of ways of working, there are processes that support this, and if there is the sort of partnership and commitment to shared vision and purpose, then hopefully there is also the shared accountability for what's coming. Transparency and resource use, I talked about a little bit before too, that there is clear and accessible information about how resources are allocated, decisions made, outcomes are measured. And this can be supported by access to various forms of data, as well as it being part of what happens as a process within a group and a sort of a cross-sector collaboration. And shared decision making, often the holy grail, is about, and I think I say that slightly tongue-in-cheek, but also to say really clearly that this doesn't all have to be the sort of big formal everything is a shared decision making piece, that there are steps towards this, and communities often do shared decision making within themselves really effectively. So in the context of this framework, it's local communities having meaningful authority over the design, delivery and adaptation of services and supports, and that power is held locally, not just consulted locally. So we all know stories and have seen situations where communities have been consulted and it doesn't equate to power, and it doesn't equate to sharing the decision making. Okay. And partnership, it's interesting, as we were doing this work, one of the team said to me, but doesn't everybody know what they mean? Like, don't we all understand what those things are? Like, isn't that sort of just part of the work? And it was a sort of interesting reflection about, we do all have sort of views about what this means, but it was a really quite useful process to break it down and think, what do we really mean in the context of place-based work? What does partnership mean? So the equitable contribution and influence, which is about all partners bringing something to the table, but also recognising that all partners have something to bring to the table, and which is the equitable contribution. It's also not expecting one to sort of do all the heavy lifting, but that there are different types of contributions. So knowledge, resources, relationships are all contributions, as are the sort of more obvious, funding and authorising environment and all the rest of it. And in terms of influence, it's that all partners have a say in shaping the path forward. So, and we've seen some interesting examples where groups are navigating this really well, in terms of saying, you do what you can do and we'll do what we can do, but let's all sort of be doing what we can together. Trust and reciprocity is key all over the sort of spectrum in terms of place-based work, both in terms of the way people work with individual community members and families, but also within partnerships. Without trust, not much can get far. But partnerships are built on respect, shared learning and a commitment to long-term relational work, not transactional exchanges. And so the relational work is another one of those pieces that comes through everywhere you go and everyone you talk to, that it is about relationships, and we experience it, everybody experiences it, but it is a different way of working, often between organisations. And so it's an important sort of element to pay attention to. And there are some really good tools available to measure this and to see how strongly it's happening, which I think is the other thing, that often it's a bit of a nebulous concept, whereas there have been some tools developed that give a bit of definition to how do you know whether it's happening or it's not. Cross-sector collaboration, we have defined as a structure here, and people may disagree, but it's been defined that, or sort of categorised as that, because there are structures that can be put in place that enable it, that then create a sort of sustainability to it that is not based on the relationship between this person and that person from an organisation, but that it is formalised. And so it's the way governments, funders, service providers and communities work together. It's the structure for that, breaking down silos and aligning efforts. And then the shared vision and purpose, I think we've heard lots of people say this is often the starting point. And so we did have a bit of a think about, is there a natural order to some of this? Do some of these depend on others? And we'll be interested in people's views. But the shared vision and purpose is around stakeholders co-creating the common agenda that reflects the community's aspirations rather than institutional mandates. And as a sort of process, it can be a really powerful thing for bringing communities together, but also vitally important in terms of being clear about what it is you're coming together to achieve, rather than sort of we want to fix the whole, but being really specific about what are we going to do together.
So I want to acknowledge some of the conversations that are happening in the chat, and then I'll come to the Slido part. And I think building, even what you were saying before, that a lot of this is the practice that is already existing, and we've built this framework from what we were reading and what we know. And again, Hassel here has pointed out that we are a lot of these principles are associated strongly and aligned with the priority reforms under the Closing the Gap National Partnership. And
Absolutely.
those terms are very strong there. So it's going to hopefully reinforce. There's been a great conversation between Jess and I think Brenda about our workforce work, and acknowledging that a lot of that interest, is building that capacity in place and supporting that capacity in place. And so how can we do that? So there's been links there as well to some of the work that the Enable team is doing in place. In terms of the Slido, I think a question that's getting a lot of thumbs ups as well, and acknowledgements, is that point that, unstable funding leading to changing programs, loss of staff, knowledge and reactive rather than visionary programming and response. So that tension of being able to do that work when the funding is as it is there.
Yes.
We are also, if people want to also, because I think some people with our Slido have been confused, if you want to also drop into the chat, there's one also here that's saying, can the links to the tools for measuring partnership, trust, and reciprocity be shared? So I don't know if we want to talk to some of the working in place. Yeah.
To go to pick one. So the short-term insecure funding and the impact that has on capacity to keep doing things, to plan, to give staff any kind of certainty, is well recognised, but is also one of the key drivers of some of the work coming through in terms of different commissioning approaches, and in terms of some of the advocacy work happening with government. It is really well recognised that this is just one of those things that keeps creating cycles and is a barrier to impact. And certainly for, we hear a lot about how difficult it is for people who are leading organisations and working in organisations to know that there's a funding cliff, and often you don't know till 10 minutes before whether it's going to shift. And the reality is that people have mortgages, they have expenses, they need to know whether they've got a job and they're getting a paycheck next week. So this is certainly something that at one level seems so simple but has been quite hard to shift, that is certainly being raised, is probably the way to put that. And we hear it everywhere all the time. And so it is front of mind that it is a struggle. Yeah. And in terms of the tools around trust, reciprocity, partnerships, so there is a tool on the website called Working in Place, which has a bit of a sort of self-assessment about where are you at across the 12 elements, and has, particularly in terms of the partnership one, has a sort of a checklist and an assessment. There is a tool that was developed it was probably 6-7 years ago, called the chat tool, which is the collaboration health assessment tool, which again has a whole series of questions for a partnership to look at together and respond to. And it has been used by quite a few collaborations over a period of time, so you can see how things have changed as well. And in terms of, there's also the the classic Vic Health Partnerships tool, which is also a kind of classic for a reason. And in terms of trust and reciprocity. I think part of what we found in the evidence review is it's still not particularly easy to define or measure, but there are a number of tools that we have found and are in the tools list for trust and reciprocity, which hopefully the link has been shared as well. We can, thank you, collaboration health assessment tool, got that one around the wrong way. And so there are, my recollection is there are about 5 tools that we've sort of curated, for want of a better word, so it wasn't a sort of random selection, but that have been curated and we've had some feedback on whether they are useful tools or not. But the other opportunity is that if they're, if we need to develop one together specifically for this, we can also.
Yeah, and maybe I can add that we've got, as Eve said, tools being curated on the website, and that's something we'll update and visit and keep adding to
Absolutely.
as we learn as well.
The other invitation is if you found tools that are really useful, please share them.
Yes. Want to know what works in the field as well, in the
Absolutely.
community.
Yes.
We've got a few minutes to wrap up, so we might move to also how people can stay engaged as well. Yep.
In case we have not made it clear that there are lots of resources and tools on the website and we are adding to them, the resources page, we will keep adding to things. We are also in the process of setting up a knowledge hub, which will make all of this much easier. But as any of you who have been involved in that process before know, it doesn't happen overnight. And so in the meantime, the website is the best place to find the tools and resources. The newsletter comes out each month as it did last night. And so there will be more links and sort of more links to tools, but also opportunities in the newsletter. These monthly sessions we will have a schedule of, and we'll be very interested in your feedback about what it is you would like them to do. And if we have as much interest as we've had today, it might be that we run sort of multiple on the same topic so that people have the opportunity to interact and share in a different way. And a big plug for our inaugural Place-Based Impact Summit in mid-June, which is happening in Brisbane. And so we are looking to bring together the sort of breadth and diversity of place-based organisations who are having impact, and to unpack various enablers and to have some really interesting sort of presentations about what is happening, but also the ability to be in sort of interactive sessions where you can test things, build things, and meet others. And in the midst of all of this, we are also developing more opportunities to come together. So our impact learning networks will expand. And again, we're really keen to understand who's interested in what topics and how you might like to come together. And here's our plug with 5 minutes to go. We are really keen to hear your direct feedback about what would be useful, what do you need, what do you want? And I can promise you that it will translate directly into how we sort of prioritise what it is we're doing and focused on, because we want to be building what it is that people need. And of course, we would really appreciate some feedback because everybody has to collect data.
Yeah, and Tabby, if we go back down to the slide before, you can see the QR code for the survey. We know that it's really, once you leave the session, you've got 100 other things to do. So if you want to take the last few minutes to complete the questions in here and pick that up as opportunity for feedback. We note there are others, there's been already input as well that coming through in those last few minutes. A lot of discussion around subsidiarity in the word. There's also about working with lived experience and how and looking at cultural and psychological safety considerations, and obviously interested in how some of this will be evaluated. So there's definitely interest, I think, to stay in touch on these topics. And there's a question that the recording will be available, as well as some of the links that we've been dropping into the chat.
Fantastic. Thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to seeing lots of you next month.